I am burying my mother today. Nobody came to her funeral. There were no flower arrangements. I did not receive a single sympathy card. It was as if nobody noticed, because there was no funeral. Nor was there any casket. There is no grave marker, because there is no grave site. My mother came into this world with nothing and left with nothing. It has been almost a year since she left this world. I needed some time to process my thoughts. I still don't know if I can even share those thoughts. Let me start at the beginning, or was it the end? Perhaps the beginning of the end. At age 3, I was separated from my mother due to an ugly divorce. Divorces are never pretty. They only bring destruction and pain to all involved, and the repercussions are long-lasting, perhaps even permanent. I need to go back even further than that. The beginning of our story, which is the story of my mother and I. How I came to be who I am. My mother was just 16 years old. She had been dating my father for about 6 months. He, coming from an unchurched family, one lacking any spiritual or godly moral values, likely felt that he had possession of his naive young girlfriend, sexually forced himself on her. She claims it was rape, and felt powerless to stop him against his strength. So I was conceived that day. Her parents had 10 children, but the 10th child was given up for adoption because my grandmother was already overwhelmed with caring for the 9, while her husband was a weekend alcoholic. I heard stories of my grandmother going to the bar to get some money from him in order to buy groceries before he spent it all. Later, my aunts told me that he was abusive towards her, but she kept that a secret to herself. So when the news of this pregnancy was told, my mother's parents could not cope with the burden of another child to care for, another mouth to feed. It was more than they could bear, or perhaps more than my grandmother could take. So a shotgun wedding ensued. It is my personal belief that when a young, unwed girl gets pregnant, the correct solution is not always a forced marriage. In fact, that may be more disastrous. It certainly is not a healthy way to start a marriage. Though some of those situations may turn out right, I know some that did, most end in disaster. I think it would be far better for the parents to support the young girl and give her time to sort things out for herself and a chance to grow up, to mature in a loving, supportive home for the good of everyone involved. After the 4th child was born to that unstable marriage, it ended in divorce 3.5 years later. My poor mother, thrust into motherhood at age 16, 4 children before she turned 20 years of age. She was robbed of her youth, had no job experience, and no chance for independence. The babies came October 1960, October 1961, October 1962, and December 1963, and all by cesarean birth. After the 4th, she had her tubes tied Being underage, she needed her mother's consent to have the surgery. I am told that decision angered my father because it was done without his knowledge. The baby was 6 months old when the separation happened. I was 3.5. Our mother told us that she left my father, taking the 4 of us with her. She moved in with her sister and got a job. While she was at work, my father showed up, full of anger and rage, even attacking the car in the yard. I think he broke a window and threatened that if he didn't get the children back, he would kill our mother. I'm sure my mother was frightened and believed his threats, whether intended or not. He can be a very intimidating man, especially when he is angry. So she returned the children to him and left him for good. His story was that she didn't love us and that she left us. Who tells that to children? We were just property to be claimed, a battle to be won for my father's ego. He meant to hurt her so that he could be the victor, to destroy her. I can say that with confidence because he never really proved his love toward any of his children. He has hurt all of his children and driven them from him. We all grew up never truly feeling loved. My father accused my mother of infidelity in front of the divorce court judge, which I believe to be entirely impossible. With only 3 months between pregnancies, plus the healing time after a cesarean birth, there is no woman on earth who would desire any extramarital affairs under those conditions. She was not present in the court case and had no voice in the proceedings, so the judge gave full custody of the 4 very young children to my father. My mother was given visitation rights, but that was never truly honored. My mother was raped, abused, robbed of her children, rendered unable to have more children, and left broken-hearted. It must have wrecked her. I heard that at one time she tried to commit suicide, ended up in a mental institute for a period of time. She had nobody to help her, nobody to support her, no organization to turn to. With such a beginning, it's no wonder that she never recovered. Her life story is the saddest story I know, going from one bad marriage to another until she had been married at least 5 times with more failed relationships in between. A trail of abusive men in a continual cycle of bad choices, leading to more abuse and a lifetime of running from responsibilities and running from relationships. She disappeared for 32 years, cut off from all family connections, including her own mother and siblings. Her mother died not knowing what had become of her daughter. There were rumors of her death, and so many unanswered questions surrounding her. The 4 of us grew up without a tender mother's love. Our stepmother rejected us from the beginning. It was always made very clear, a distinction, that her 2 biological sons were her children, and the 4 of us were his children. Dad never understood how it really was, how she treated us differently, and how she always favored her own. But we knew, we felt it every day. He did not know anything of the abuses we suffered, especially that of my brother. But I'm not going to talk about that anymore. So I grew up with 2 mothers, but never really had any meaningful relationship with either of them. I got married to a very devoted, loving man, and we had 6 wonderful children. I was determined to be the mother to my children that I never had. My children grew up in a stable Christian home where they knew they were loved. We have had a great life, so vastly different from where I came from. How often I dreamed of my mother returning and the ability to reestablish a meaningful relationship. I fantasized about such a relationship for many years. Sometimes I would see a woman who kind of looked like my biological mother, and my heart would skip a beat, wishing it were really her. How I wished that one day I could just pick up the phone and call Mother to have a heart-to-heart talk. But it never happened.
He said, roses will bloom again. Just wait and see. Don't mourn what might have been. Only God knows how and when that roses will bloom again.
I clung to what little I had of my mother, trying to make something out of the emptiness. She lit candles at Christmas time, so I would do the same. She had a nativity scene set up, so I did that too. She named her children all beginning with the letter D: Debbie, Dale, Donna, and Diana. Well, actually, my brother was named after his father, but we called him by his middle name. So when I named my children, I named them all with the letter J. The boys with J names, but my daughter with an R, because I wanted good Bible names. And then I did something special with their middle names. I spelled out the word reward, because my children are my rewards. Lo, children are a heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Psalms 127, my life verses. My children grew up, got married, and started having their own families. After so much time had passed, I resolved that if only she knew who I had become, if she could meet my husband and knew my children, to see what a beautiful family I have, that would be enough. When I looked into the mirror, sometimes I would see my mother's face reflected, especially in the eyes. I wondered how much was she like me, or perhaps I was like her. In my imagination, she was a far more dignified woman, full of wisdom and understanding, a woman of class. I guess I conjured up the persona of who I wished her to be. That image grew over time, only to be shattered by the reality.
Roses will bloom again. Just wait and see. Don't mourn what might have been. Only God knows how and when that roses will bloom again.
9 years ago, my mother returned from the dead, so it seemed. We all had assumed she was dead by now. I came home from work. I logged into Facebook to find a friend request from what looked to be my mother. At first I thought it was a hoax, a fake profile perhaps, some family scam to try to make us feel better, knowing that we had been searching and asking to learn what happened to her. I searched through her profile, looking through photos to find evidence that it was genuinely her. I found a phone number, so I called her. It truly was her. I knew that voice. She had a low, soft voice that I remembered from when I used to speak to her over the phone before she disappeared in, I think it was 1980 or 81 or somewhere around there. She was alive. I was shocked and so full of hope. I think all of us were full of hope. As adults, we would be finally free to talk with our mother with no other parents to block that from happening anymore. I wish I could say we had a happy reunion and our relationships were restored. But what we learned was that she was but a shell of a woman who had been battered by life and could not cope with the realities that her children still wanted a mother, needed a mother's love and acceptance. There was such an emptiness in her eyes. She couldn't explain anything, didn't even try. Perhaps could not find the words. She seemed cold and calloused, without emotion, no remorse, and no apologies. Each of us were met with confusion and disappointment, left with even more questions than answers. She moved back to her home state to live near her sisters and came down with leukemia, which eventually took her life. I visited her bedside, knowing it wouldn't be long before she was gone. She was weak and frail and hardly eating, literally withering away. I asked her if there was anything I could do for her. She asked me to sing for her. I am not a singer. But there, in her room, beside her bed, I sang 3 gospel songs to her. The Old Rugged Cross, Amazing Grace, and In the Garden. I am happy that I know she is a saved woman. She had accepted the Lord Jesus as her Savior, so she does have a home in heaven. Though she never met my family in person, through Facebook she saw them all, even my grandchildren. Each of my sisters got a portion of Mother's ashes to do as we wanted with them. She did have one wish, to be thrown into Thunderhole in Bar Harbor. It's a famous place on the coast of Maine, where there's a cave that thunders as the ocean waves crash against it. A silly request, but whatever. Both my sisters and my aunt made a trip there to carry out my mother's wish. One sister included her ashes in the mortar of the tile floor in her sunroom that she remodeled, which is sort of a retreat, a place to enjoy the sun, read a good book, or do some knitting. The other sister planted her in her garden. I may have missed out on a relationship on this earth, but I shall see her again. In heaven, we will not be bound by ignorance, hurt, pain, guilt, shame, nor sorrow. I imagine she will have a greater understanding of all things. We all will. We shall be reunited over there. So here, in my rose garden, I have made a memorial to my mother. Roses were her favorite flower. I prepared this little rose garden to plant her ashes. Her life was a life of thorns, and I have experienced my share of thorns, but out of the ashes and thorns grow beautiful blossoms. The rose is a hardy, strong plant, very resilient. That describes my life, strong and resilient. I have learned to blossom even among the thorns. Did you know that the thorniest roses have the sweetest smell? Mother, I'm sorry that this life was so unkind to you. I know you are better off now, and I shall see you again by and by.
The precious rose of Sharon. cheer.